Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement 2. On today's video, we're going to be taking a look at this motherboard that I found in a random box. I know absolutely nothing about this motherboard other than I took a quick look at it and it doesn't look like it's completely damaged by battery leakage, so there's a good chance we can get it working. So I just want to take a look at this, see what it's all about, see how fast this thing is, see if we can overclock it, you know, all the usual stuff that I like to do with PC motherboards. This video should be kind of an easy one because all that troubleshooting I recently did on the Mac SE30s, well, it took a lot of brain power, and sometimes you just need something like this, a nice easy video that's just kind of light and fluffy, and then we'll get to some more hardcore troubleshooting. All right, so this is a motherboard, and as you can see, we have some standoffs in here, so the thing is wobbling quite a bit. I have a Bic pen here, which was sent in kindly by one of my viewers, and this is a good way to get these PC standoffs off the board. Sometimes you kind of got to wiggle it around a little bit, but they usually pop out pretty easily. So I never knew this trick back in the day. I always used to use needle nose pliers to get these out. So if you have some PC motherboards with these standoffs, you're trying to get them out, highly recommend just finding a bog standard Bic pen like this and, well, going at it. And yeah, by the way, you might notice there's paint residue on my hands. I was doing a little bit of painting outside. Not retro related, just stuff on the house, actually. Little touch-up stuff. And it's funny because I noticed as I was pretty sloppy that I seem to have got some on my phone case. Not a big deal, it's a cheap case, but yeah, kind of bad on my part. Oh, I noticed this one here has been cut off. So I guess the case that this was in didn't originally have a little slot there. If you're not familiar with these, you put them in the motherboard, and the case, AT style cases, which is what this motherboard is here, it has these little slots that these all have to slide into. It's super fiddly because these things move around a lot and nothing was very precise. And that's how you got these motherboards mounted. Usually you would install 1 or 2 screws usually to hold the motherboard actually in place from sliding around. But generally these plastic things are just quite a nuisance, but you definitely need them if you're ever going to install a motherboard into an AT case. So if you're thinking of building an AT system and you're not really familiar with that, like if it's your first time, don't forget to order some of these. I'm assuming you can find them on eBay. Don't really know. I've never actually looked just because I've had enough stuff floating around here in the basement, like in my little box of screws, that I have some of these little standoffs if I need them. Now it's not wobbling, much better. So what do we have here? Well, right off the bat, we can tell here that we have a 386SX processor, and it looks like there was a place for a Varda type battery. I'm assuming that's what this was, and it was never installed, which is awesome. Doesn't mean there's no corrosion at all though. If we zoom in here in this corner here, you can see there's a little bit of corrosion, and I bet you there was a battery pack connected to these pins here, and the leakage from the batteries wicked their way along the cable and actually got their way all the way to the motherboard. Looks minor, the damage, although I guess there's a little bit on these diodes right here, but the damage doesn't look super bad. What is odd to me, and I don't think I've actually ever seen this, is this keyboard connector has this white coating on it, which is just sort of strange. Is that somehow related to the leakage? I don't see the green encrusties that you would normally get. I don't really get what this is exactly. Doesn't look like a lot of green encrusties there, but look at the bottom side. We definitely have some green encrusties here. So some of that corrosion definitely made their way here. Although it's kind of interesting, this is obviously a multi-layer PCB. You can see some of the traces there that are on the other layers. And we have a section here that I guess doesn't have the ground planes or the power planes in it. I'm not 100% sure what the reason would be for that, but it is what it is. Bottom of the board, you can definitely see those extra traces there. And you know this thing has a big flood fill. It's very interesting, isn't it? How every single pin and via is on a perfect grid. So whatever software they use to design this thing, look how perfectly lined up it is. That's kind of unusual. These here are maybe the only ones on this area right there that are not in that perfect grid, but certainly here, everything is. So back on the top side, there's our processor, 36SX, 16 megahertz. We have space here for the Mathco processor. This is a specific version that's designed to be used with 36SXs. Our chipset on this motherboard is the VL82C, it might be 200. There are a lot of these large chips and they're probably all sequential. So 2C201, 82C100. It's hard to know exactly which one of these is the name of the chipset, all of these need to work together to create the IBM PC chipset. And of course, in later motherboards, all this stuff was combined into one. 202, we have a 205 chip here and a 203 chip here. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do a little Googling that we find this under 82C201 or 82C100. It's usually the lowest number that you need to look for. From a date code perspective, you can see on these chips here, which are soldered, are 1990 14th week. So this board was made after this point. We have a few PALs, and these are the R versions, which means they're registered. So there's actually state tables and stuff inside of these. It's not just as simple as taking a bunch of TTL logic and combining them down into these. These actually can do a little bit more. So if these go bad, you're pretty much out of luck. Almost always these things are locked, so you cannot put them into a programmer and try to read them. Continuing on, looking for date code, 6th week of 90. We have 12th week of 90 so far, these ones here. 9th week of 90 so far, these 14th week ones are the latest. We have a couple crystal oscillators. This one is used for the oscillator signal that goes to the ISA bus, typically for CGA cards. And then this one's probably used for the processor clock. Most of the time the crystal oscillator, which incidentally is on the 19th week, so we're actually a little bit later than that. That kind of dates this motherboard. Usually these are double the speed of the processor, and I think 386SX, off the top of my head, actually takes a clock signal that is double of what the actual chip runs at. So it internally divides it by 2. So that means that the motherboard here, maybe the chipset or whatever, takes this and then divides that by 2 and then sends it to the processor, so it's 32 megahertz, and then that gets divided internally to be 16. Don't quote me on that without checking the data sheet. Might be wrong on that fact, but all the 386SX motherboards I've ever seen always at least have a crystal oscillator that runs at double the speed of the processor, and I thought that that was just because the processor itself needs that double clock. Now remember, this 386SX processor was this low-cost thing that Intel came up with. It is a 386 internally, and the bus itself is also a 386 bus, like the signals and whatever. But the external data bus is only 16-bit, which means you kind of lose a lot of performance over the 32-bit version. And this was really designed for cheaper motherboards. When you have more traces for 32 bits versus 16-bit, it just costs more, it's more complex to get the motherboard designed. And the 386SX enabled motherboard manufacturers to take their 286 design and easily upgrade it to become a 386 board. In fact, a lot of chipsets that support the 386SX also support the 286. The chipset can do both. It's not strictly something that you can just drop into a 286 though. It's not like it's signal compatible in every way. But like I said, the later chipsets supported both, and it just enabled these motherboard manufacturers to make cheaper motherboards because you didn't have to run so many traces to the RAM and all that kind of thing. And speaking of the RAM, we got a whole assortment of DIP memory on here. Well, let's take a closer look at what we're dealing with here. So the reason why you're seeing these double footprints here, and the RAM chips we have installed are actually the larger of the two, is these are higher capacity chips than the smaller footprint, and I think the smaller footprint can either be 64K or 256K per 8 chips. And when we look at the RAM that's on here a little closer, we have 70 nanoseconds, and the 1000 here denotes these are 1 megabit chips. So each one of these is 1 bit wide, and of course 16 bits mean you need 16 of these chips, and then we're going to have 2 additional ones for parity. And indeed, there are exactly 18 of these on the board for 2 megabytes of RAM. I don't think they ever made this chip in this package that supported 4 megabytes. I'm not even sure there's any extra pins to enable that. You would really just need 1 extra pin on these to enable 4 megabyte chips, and that would allow this to go all the way up to 16 megabytes of RAM, but as it sits now, the maximum RAM capacity on the motherboard is only 4 megabytes. And if you use the smaller chips, then you're gonna be talking about 1 meg of RAM if you fully populate all of this. And it's very unlikely this board actually supports 64K DRAM, although it's theoretically possible, which would mean you have a 386SX system with a total of 256K if it's fully populated, which is kind of hilariously unusable. Now, the funny thing about this motherboard is we know it came from 1990, and why didn't they just use SIMs? There's clearly room on the board right here for that type of memory. You'd easily be able to have 4 RAM slots, which would be the exact same wiring that we have here. And we know machines like the Mac Plus, which I think was 86, was using SIMs. So there's no reason why they weren't in at this point, although I suppose they were still a little high end and maybe not super common. And we know that this motherboard is obviously a low cost motherboard versus 386DX motherboards that were available at the time. Those came out in the late 80s. Those full 32-bit boards were often much bigger than this because they need a lot more traces to hook up the RAM in a 32-bit way. Not to mention, people kind of demanded more RAM capability than just 4 megabytes with their DX systems. This processor, even though it's a 386 and it's 32 bits internally, which supports up to like 4 gigs of RAM, I think, actually can only address externally 16 megabytes of RAM, exactly the same as the 286. Now let's take a look at the jumpers here. We have some stuff that's labeled Turbo Select, either hardware switch, I guess front panel switch, or a keyboard switch. So you could use your a keystroke on there to switch it. We have these jumpers unlabeled. RAM size jumpers, I'm assuming, for these 3, and then color monochrome. You set this if you have a monochrome card, or remove it, I guess, for color, although I don't know for sure. We have jumpers all over this board. There's 3 more here that are unlabeled. And we have J13 over here with 2 selections, also unlabeled. Down this corner of the board, we have the connections for the front panel, the speaker, the key lock, and the power LED, I'm assuming, turbo LED, reset switch, and the turbo switch. And we have our original AMI licensed BIOS chips here from 1986. Kind of interesting how old they are. It's 386SX BIOS Plus. You're going to have 2 of these since it's a 16-bit data path, and these are 8-bit wide each. And this chip here is the keyboard BIOS, or well, it's really a microcontroller that allows the system to quickly and easily interface to the keyboard. On most PC motherboards, these chips are over in this area near the keyboard connector, and they often have problems when you have leakage from the battery and traces get damaged. And when you have trouble with the connections going to these, you can have issues with the system not even starting, because a lot of times these handle the reset functionality of the motherboard. It's definitely on the more unusual side for clones to have the keyboard BIOS way over here, where you're going to have traces that run from this chip all the way over to the keyboard connector. And this IC over here, the 146818AP from 1989, 49th week, this is the CMOS and the clock. That chip is all over the place. You might have remembered that the Plexus P20 was using that exact chip actually, and I ended up replacing it with a Dallas clock with a battery attached right to it, because the original external battery that was on that system leaked all over the motherboard and did cause a little bit of damage. Again, we have a little bit of an unusual situation where this is pretty far from 2 critical things that this chip needs. Battery power, so that's coming from over here, and I guess over here. Maybe that's why the battery's here and not over there, because it's kind of in line with that battery connection that makes its way over here. Because this is the non-volatile RAM, so it stores your CMOS settings inside of here, plus it has the real-time clock, so it's always counting up, you know, the time of day so that you have accurate time on your system. But to do that, you need a crystal oscillator, 32.768 kilohertz typically, to keep that clock going. And it's usually right near here. It's like, that's the best way to do it. And on this board, it's way over here. Also kind of strange, but I guess they just needed somewhere to stick it, and there's a little bit of room there. Now this crystal works in conjunction with these passive components right here, plus this IC, to create that 32 kilohertz time signal that then goes over to that other chip on the other corner of the board. And this has to be running all the time, hence the probable use of this 74HCT14. These are CMOS parts, a bit lower power, which is good considering you're gonna have to run this all the time off battery while the system is turned off. And I know I was sort of leaving this to the very end here, but there is the brand name, Zeos International, St. Paul, Minnesota, 55112. That's the zip code, USA. I worked on a lot of clone motherboards, and I can't say I've ever run into a Zeos, if that's how you say it, international motherboard before, which is kind of one of the reasons why I thought this thing was kind of interesting to look at. So let's look on the RetroWeb to see if we can find anything on this motherboard. And of course, if it's not here, I will take pictures of this, dump the BIOS, and upload it here to the RetroWeb. First, I'm going to take a look at Zeos International and see if that even comes up with anything. And did I type that wrong? No, I did not. It came up with nothing. Next thing I think we need to do is try the advanced search. So we're going to do the chipset. So we'll look for the various numbers that we see. So remember, it was 82C100, and that is coming up. 386DX chipset. Let's try 201. Here we go. This might be it here. So it shows 201 and 100. So when we search for that chipset, looks like it wasn't used on a whole bunch of motherboards. And as I suspected, it appears to be compatible with 286s and 386SXs, because we got a kind of a mix here of both types. Now this one here just says 386, but we can see that there's a 386SX there, so we know that that's not a DX. And one thing we can see for sure is that this motherboard appears to not be in the database here, which is not great because we don't know what all those jumpers mean on the motherboards. So hopefully they're configured in a way that makes sense. But one thing you can try to do when you have motherboards like this is you can look up the data sheet, because a lot of times those jumpers connect to pins on the chipset itself. And then all you need to do is figure out which jumper goes to where, and then you look up what that pin does, if we find the data sheet, of course, and then that means that you might be able to tell what the function is of that jumper. So here is actually a link that took me back to the retro web, and I didn't even check to see if those motherboards that were listed had the datasheet listed, in the files and stuff. So it seems that specifically the 82C201, which is on this board, along with those other chips, is just a component of the chipset, and it looks like they actually sold these separately. And this chip here says it replaces the 82C284 clock controller and the 288 bus controller, both used on 286 systems. It also replaces the 84A clock generator, driver, 2 PAL devices for many decoders, and 30 other less complex integrated circuits with state logic. So I think this one chip alone took away a huge number of chips, which is why those original 386 and 286 motherboards were so big, that these chipsets were so revolutionary for reducing the size of everything. Looks like it can come in 2 different forms, 16 and 20 megahertz. And I'm looking at the board here. This one here has the -16 variant, so 16 megahertz max. And this is what I was talking about with all the various pins that are on these chips and what they do. And then you can look at the functions, and some of these are configuration pins that might end up going to jumpers, especially the input ones, the ones with the I here. And it does look like this chip specifically generates the wait states and handles that stuff. So it could be that to set this thing into a high speed, zero wait state mode, there might be an extra pin that configures that. And look at this thing here, this input pin 80, RAM write wait state indicates the number of wait states to be used for onboard RAM cycles. A high indicates 1 wait state while the low indicates 0. This could easily be one of the jumpers on the board right here. And just setting it makes this thing run in 1 wait state or 0 wait state mode, depending on how fast your memory is. I'm going to take a quick look at the other chips that are on here. This is the 82C100, which is the peripheral controller. Oddly enough here, it says it only supports 12 megahertz CPU clock. And the chip on the motherboard doesn't have a -16 after it. So it's not specifically designed to run at 16 megahertz. And we can see here that this chip replaces a bunch of more things, including the interrupt controllers, the counter timer, the memory mapper, the DMA controllers. These were all discrete chips on the original IBM PC 286 system, or the IBM PC 5170. The next chip I was going to look at was the 203, which is the address buffer chip. Also comes in 2 versions. This one is the -16. I wouldn't be surprised if the RAM size stuff goes into this chip. Those jumpers, that is, for configuring the RAM size. And no, it doesn't actually look like this has any inputs on here specifically for controlling the RAM size. So that's obviously some other chip. Next up is the 202. This is the memory controller. This one is the one that probably takes the RAM size. And indeed it is. There it is. RAM select 012. Those are the 3 jumpers that are labeled on here. And what's cool is we can look up in this data sheet to see what those various configurations result in when it comes to the physical DRAM on the motherboard. It also looks like there's some amount of shadowing that's supported on here. And I don't know if this is a BIOS option or if this is something that is configured externally with inputs. But with a combination of these various inputs here, we have all these different functional modes that this controller supports. And then here is a configuration register that hopefully the BIOS that's on here allows us to configure. If not, you might have to configure this manually using a little COM program in DOS to enable some of this functionality. We can see that this actually supports 8 megs of RAM using 1 meg chips, 72 of them, but that's not physically possible on this motherboard. It only has enough room for 36 chips. And you can see the memory map here for 4 meg mode. I just noticed it says 4K, even though it should say 4M. We have 640K, then we have a gap here, and then we have the upper part of memory. This is the 1 megabyte section of RAM. The ROMs sit there, the BIOS ROM. So any other adapter ROMs and CGA, VGA, whatever sits in this little gap right here. And then the rest of the RAM goes up through here. So this little section of RAM here, the 384K, that top section of 1 megabyte, is mapped up to the top of address space up here. So it is accessible as extended memory, but if you turn on the shadowing, it's not. Because what happens is it maps the RAM on top of the ROMs there, which allows you to enable shadowing. And if you're not familiar with shadowing is it will copy the ROM code, or you can copy the ROM code off the system BIOS or any other ROMs that are in that space into the DRAM. And then the BIOS will reconfigure the register that sets that shadow memory as the actual ROM code. So when you go to access, say, the VGA ROM or the system ROM that's on the motherboard, instead of going to the physical ROM chip on the motherboard, which is really slow, it actually goes to your DRAM, which is way faster. And that's a huge speed up for any system that allows shadowing. And most people think that shadowing was something that was really introduced on the 386 platform because that was when you first started really seeing it. And this is different, by the way, than cache memory. This is not caching, this is simply shadowing. It's using the main DRAM instead of the slow ROMs. But really, it was introduced with these chipsets, and it worked on 286s as well. And it would offer a really substantial speed up with some applications that are using the ROM BIOS calls if you end up turning on that shadowing. What I'm looking for here is information on how to set up the RAM size jumpers. There it is right there. It was on the table we were already looking at. I was going to say I didn't see it, but so there are 3 jumpers, RAM select 2, 1, and 0, and they represent these bits right here. So for 4 megabytes, or rather for 2 megabytes that's on here right now, we should have RAM select 2 and 0 selected, and the jumper 0 should be off. It might be inverted depending on the way the motherboard is designed though, where when you pull them off, it actually is at 5 volts, and putting the jumper on brings it down to 0. So in that case, we're going to have RAM select 1 with a jumper, and 2 and 0 will not be selected. And there it is. Yes, and that's exactly how it is. RAM select 0 and 2 are not on there, so that means those are actually pulled up to 5 volts. Those are set to 1, and RAM select 1 has a jumper, which brings it down to 0 volts, which means we have 1, 0, 1. And take a look at this. There's a shadow RAM jumper right there, which, if the jumper is designed in exactly the same way as the RAM select jumper, which means the jumper, when it's installed, grounds that signal. And there's the shadow RAM map, I guess. And I'm assuming that means we have 0 set, which means the shadow RAM is not enabled, and you're going to have access to that additional RAM that would normally be lost to the shadow memory here in this section. But you also don't get that extra performance that you get when you have the shadow RAM enabled. So next up, I took a look for Zeos International, and here it is, defunct. And they lasted until 1995 from 81. So a pretty good tenure there. Based in Minnesota, so that makes sense. The motherboard says St. Paul, but St. Paul and Minneapolis, they're right near each other. And the article says they were founded in 81 by Gregory Herrick. And before manufacturing PCs, the company was called NPC Electronics. NPC was a contract assembly business best known for developing a transmitter device called the radio relay. Marketed primarily to real estate brokers, this product enabled prospective homebuyers to tune in and listen to pre-recorded information about property listings. That's pretty clever. So these days here in the US, if you like walk by a house that's for sale, a lot of times there's a sign that says for sale out front, and there'll be like a little sign that it shows some photos and information about the house for sale. And of course, nowadays you can scan a QR code that takes you to a more in-depth listing. But originally you might have to call the agent to arrange to see the house or whatever. And I guess what this would do is a sign would just say, tune into this radio station, and it'll have a recording that allows you to, well, like listen to what the house is all about. That's fascinating. Unfortunately, I clicked the link to Radio Relay, and there's no actual article here. Going on to the history on the PC side of thing, they made something called the PC Speeder, a device designed to increase the clock speed and performance of the 8086. And it says they sold their first PC in 1987 with an ad in Computer Shopper, which is this old thick magazine. It was like literally that thick, huge pages, all designed to help you find PCs. It was like, I looked at so many of those Computer Shopper magazines. They're really hard to find nowadays because no one really kept them. They were very timely, you know, with the prices. And when you got a new Computer Shopper, you always threw the old one away. So not a lot of those exist anymore. And there are some that are scanned, but very, very few of them, which is a shame. Because many companies like this advertised in that magazine, but maybe not in that many issues. And because those have never been scanned, there's no way to even find those ads. Now, fortunately, archive.org is still down due to a cyber attack, so I can't look up this edition just to see if they even have it and then try to find an ad from this Zeos company. They actually had 2 retail stores. So if you lived in St. Paul, Minneapolis area, maybe you remember these here, Arden Hills and Golden Valley. During their peak, they sold 3646 systems under the Zeos and Discovery brand names, and in the mid-90s, they sold Pentium computers as well, branded Pantera, and laptops branded Freestyle, Meridian, and Color Note. The Zeos 36SX was once featured on the cover of PC Magazine, rated Editor's Choice in the January 30, 1990 issue. I wonder if that was a machine that had this motherboard in it. Oh no, here it is. This is it. Best Buy for Business. PC Labs tests 31 new 36SX machines, 32-bit power, color VGA, 40 meg hard drive as low as $19.95. So here's the article, page 97. Is that the machine right there? I can't tell. The label's not visible. So it says here 36SX PCs, they offer true 386 functionality, so you can run 32-bit applications and 25% faster compared to 286 systems, but only for a few $100s more, I think, which is why these were so appealing. Now looking at these various systems here, a lot of them are just so regular clone looking, like there's nothing special going on inside. They're just assembling various parts in there and then selling it off. Other ones, of course, like the AT&T machine here, probably had more bespoke parts inside. And look at this guy here, the Bus 36SX, in a huge tower with this mega keyboard with so many extra function keys. I kind of love these visualizations they have for where the peripherals inside the case go. So the slots and then the drive bays and power supply. Oh, and take a look at this. So this is very common. This is actually an ad. This for the system this motherboard probably came out of. Now you can buy a complete 16 megahertz 36SX hard drive system for less than a comparable 286. This was super common in PC Magazine when they were doing comparisons of a bunch of machines. It was very common for the manufacturers of the machines in the comparison test to actually place ads in the magazine, like full page ads or spreads like this one, because I'm pretty sure this is it. Oh, look at that monochrome monitor. Those are so cheap. That's it. That's got to be the computer that this motherboard came out of. And of course, I don't have the computer, I only have the motherboard here, but it's kind of cool to see it with the Zeos logo there. It's kind of uninspired though. That's right, now you can buy a complete 16 megahertz Zeos 36SX system with a 32 meg hard drive for only $13.95. If that came with a monitor, that does seem like a really good price. There's no reason to buy a 286, and there's every reason to buy your Zeos. It's so funny how wordy these ads were back in the day, isn't it? Just look at all this text here. 36SX, 8/16 megahertz dual speed, 32 meg Seagate hard drive, 1.2 meg TAC floppy drive, ultra high speed hard drive controller with built-in SRAM cache. Wow, that's fancy. 512K of high speed memory, expandable to 16 megabytes. Caveat there. There's no way this motherboard can take 16 megabytes. That is with an ISA card. And you get way worse performance on your expanded memory over the ISA bus because you're limited to whatever the bus speed is, so like 8 megahertz. So you get a bunch of wait states in that RAM versus the motherboard RAM, which runs at, well, the full system speed. Therefore, as soon as you start using that extra memory, it slows way down. But they put this in ads to kind of claim up to 16 megabytes. But any machine that's a 286 or 386SX or whatever that's using an ISA bus, you can go up to 16 megabytes on those. 14-inch flat screen high-res amber monitor. So yeah, that one that we saw there, that was a kind of a generic Taiwanese clone monitor. Very common back in the day, very cheap as well, but you know, good clear image. It says here 6 16-bit and 2 8-bit expansion slots, which is exactly what this motherboard has on it. It totally matches. And they want you to call right now to order your own system. Or you can fill out this order form here. Probably has room to write your credit card number straight in here. So far, I don't see it. Maybe you're supposed to write a check or something like that. Oh, no, here it is. You just check Visa, MasterCard. Write your card number right on there. Just put it through the mail. The paper will just sit around. There was no like PCI requirements back then or anything. What's the Z card? I don't even know what that is. Is this something that was maybe like a Minnesota thing or a Midwest thing or something like that? But you could also pay with a check, cashier's check, that is. You go to the bank and they'll print out a special check for you. You can mail that. It's a lot safer. Or I guess COD, cash on delivery. So when they ship the system to you, the shipper will, before they deliver it to you, you have to pay them. And I assume there's an extra fee. I guess you have to put a deposit of $200 first, and then you can pay the rest to the shipper before they even give you the package. That's just something that it just doesn't exist anymore. There are the shipping rates. So ground shipping was $35, and if you wanted to do second day air, only $90 or $100 for next day air shipping anywhere in the US. A computer and a monitor, that costs like hundreds and hundreds of dollars now. And look at the systems on offer. So there were two available actually. The base model, $13.95, which had the 32 meg hard drive monochrome monitor, but only 512K of RAM. That's really stingy. but for an extra $600, which is pretty substantial. If you look at the entire price of the system, you could get yourself 14-inch VGA color monitor with a VGA card, 1 meg of RAM plus DOS 4.01. I guess you didn't even get DOS with this. You would just get a system that didn't boot. So that's a pretty expensive upgrade for 512K of additional RAM, a VGA card, and a monitor. That costs $600 extra. And did it even give you more disk space? No, I mean, it didn't give you anything else, just a more functional amount of RAM for MS-DOS. Not really enough for Windows, but still, 512K is just not really enough. It's very, very stingy, but that kind of, I don't know, a little bit of a bait and switch there. Yeah, I bet you people ordered the cheap one here and they got it and then tried to run stuff like it needs 640K and it didn't even work. And at least you could upgrade the RAM yourself. Now, unfortunately, there's no way it will ever show us what the motherboard looks like in here. Wow, it's a big ad, a really big ad. Maybe they get notified that they're going to get editor's choice. So they're like, we want this giant ad right in the middle of the review. So as people are flipping through the pages, they're going to go like, oh, like, look at that, amazing. I'm gonna order this thing up right away. So we have a Gateway 2000, the multi-performer, came with 2 megs of RAM. And I guess I missed the Zeos international listing, but here it is in the comparison chart. So 2252 out the door, it's probably with shipping or whatever. So they opted for the 1 meg version. It says it can go up to 4 megs, 60 nanoseconds. Well, we have 70 on ours. Oh, it's very stingy that if you ordered the 1 megabyte version, you got 256 kilobit chips. That meant the motherboard was fully populated. So if you wanted to upgrade to, say, 2 megs like this thing had, you had to replace all of the DRAM. Definitely some of these systems, like the Wang, definitely some of these systems here did use SIMs or SIPs in this case of some of these. And you can see there's a pretty substantial price difference all over the place. $4,000 for the Wang Laboratories. And unfortunately, this was a 2-page spread, so I don't know what all these different columns mean here. So let's go up to the top here. Okay, so setup in ROM. Not even all of these had that. Which one didn't here? NEC, had to boot a disk, I guess. Password in ROM though, ooh, that's a cool feature. And then the video and system ROM shadowing as well, nice. And some of these might have had cache memory, right? I don't think any of the 36SXs would have that. That would be kind of unusual. But if we go back down to the Zeos system here, we can see, I think it was this one here, Zeos. Yep, we know that it didn't support the password, but had setup in ROM, which we know it's AMI, and it supported the shadowing, which you could disable. It seemed the more expensive the systems, like the Wang and the Tandy here, they didn't have the setup in ROM. Kind of lame. We're not done with the specs though. Here we are, a few pages down. So we have information about the hard drive, whether it's MFM or not, the floppy drive type, some had both, some had 1.2 only, the bus speed, how many slots, the video type, so VGA or whatnot, the keyboard manufacturer. Wow, they actually mentioned that. So I gotta scroll down further to see the Zeos stuff. And then what version of DOS it came with. So 4.01 included, some of these came with 3.3, and I guess some of them came with Microsoft Windows as well. That was a nice value add. NEC Corporation, well, you were paying a bunch of money for that. So here's the Zeos 65 megabyte RLL. That's kind of nifty. So this was an ST506 type controller that would have been 16-bit. And to be honest, RLL is kind of unusual in a 16-bit form factor. I'm kind of amazed by that. Looks like the video card was a Paradise VGA card that was designed by Zeos, or at least branded by them. And the keyboard that would have come with it was a Mantan computer keyboard. Unfamiliar with that. DOS 4.01, which we knew from based on the ad that we saw there. And looking at these graphs for performance comparison, the Zeos is all the way on the right side here. It's not bad. It's not the fastest. So some of these, the graph is lower, which is faster. So like the Powerlight 36SX, my assumption is they were running like in 0 wait states, and maybe this thing was running in 1 wait state. But look at some of these. They're quite a bit slower, at least on some of these tests here. And wow, and like some of these tests, whichever this one is, it's on a different page on the spread. This machine was like the fastest. And you might be wondering, like, how is it possible there's even a difference between one 36SX to another if they're all running the same clock speed? Well, those wait states, and then of course the video card performance and the hard drive controller, and this thing had that caching hard drive controller, it said. All those things, oh, and also the RAM shadowing, that all adds up to performance differences from one system to another. So it wasn't just cut and dry that, hey, you got 16 megahertz 386, it was gonna be the same speed as every other system. No, that wasn't the case. All those components came together to give you different performance. And it's not really different if you're building a PC today as well, your video card and SSDs and whatever, the tuning in the BIOS and stuff, that stuff all affects the performance. And I really like this comprehensive testing that PC Magazine did. Imagine like testing 31 distinct systems. Like imagine testing 31 distinct systems and getting all this data and collating it. Like this is back in 1990 and that's pretty amazing. And these awesome graphs, I'm impressed. And funny to look at these photos, right? These machines all are just beige boxes and there's so little to differentiate them. Hey, at least if you're getting a Gateway 2000, you get these big lines in the G shape there. It's kind of stylish. I'm still scrolling through this huge article looking for the review on this specific machine, or at least the machine that this motherboard came out of. Ooh, look at this, Tandy 4000SX, pretty sweet. These machines are just not that common anymore. I mean, 36SX machines are, but Tandy 4000s, not super common. Not cheap though, all in, $3,800, wow. In short, a mushy keyboard, the lack of a mouse port, and some sloppy design characteristics mar an otherwise solid entry in the 386 market. Still, better than average speed and plenty of room for expansion make the 4000SX a strong addition to the popular Tandy line. We're getting down to the bottom. Here's this one here called the UTI, the most clone case ever. I know I had that exact case or one exactly like it in a PC that I built that I think was a 386 or a 286, and I don't really remember. This was way back in the day, and I changed computers a lot because I worked in a computer store and I got access to like old parts and stuff that were disused, or I don't remember exactly, but I think I had a case that looked just like that. The UTI 36SX. In short, it looks like a typical clone and comes with a price to match. The average performance and minimal warranty detract from the package though, making other machines in the same price range more attractive. Yeah. Typical clone indeed. All right, here it is, the Zeos 36SX16 by Bill O'Brien. Competitive $2,252 package, 1 meg of RAM, 60 nanosecond RAM, $2,252, 1 meg of RAM, 256 kilobit chips, 60 nanosecond as well, 65 megabyte RLL drive. The system is not only $40 cheaper than its predecessor, reviewed in August '89, but it also replaces the other model's 100 nanosecond RAM with fast 60 nanosecond chips on a new motherboard of Zeos' own design. Here it is, right here. Along with the technology redesign, the Zeos has gotten a facelift. Well, we don't have the case to look at, unfortunately. It says that the computer had a whisper quiet fan mounted inside the front of the chassis that evacuates the hot air through the vents in the faceplate. That's kind of nice. Most of these old computers had zero thought to airflow. The Nantan computer keyboard is a welcome relief from the washed out feeling of many third-party units, and the buttons, reset, turbo, and power are all accessible from the front panel. To its credit, the Zeos has shied away from the extruded on-off switches or Rube Goldberg-like mechanical extension rods, and instead uses a square flush-mounted button wired to the power supply. However, the cabling exits the back of the switch directly to the drive area, and its position might cause some mounting discomfort. I guess what they're saying here is this button there on the front of the case just pushes a power switch, very much like most AT power supplies, 120 volts or 240 right behind that switch there, and actually switches the power supply on and off. List price with 512K, as I mentioned, $1,395, 1 meg of RAM, and a bigger hard drive, I guess, is $2,252. And in short, the Zeos 36SX16 is one of the speed champions of this evaluation. Combine that performance with great expandability and quality parts and down-to-earth pricing, and the result is a winner. Editor's freaking choice. The Zeos SX16 successfully combines two things most people want in their systems: solid performance and attractive pricing. With so much going for it, how could that go wrong? Well, indeed, indeed. Unfortunately, the rest of the computer is gone, but we have this motherboard here with minimal damage. So I guess after enough going on about the ads and the performance and the specs and the design, let's see if this thing actually works. So we're going to be using my bench ATX power supply here. I put a mouse pad down on it there so the motherboard doesn't sit directly on the metal. I have an adapter here to go from ATX to AT. We're going to do the initial testing with the post analyzer card here. So we'll just pop this in to a slot, see if this thing has any signs of life. I'm predicting that it's probably going to work just fine. Let's turn this on and we'll just watch for any post codes on here. Oh, all right. Well, we have a shorted tantalum on the motherboard that kept the power supply from running. Probably something I should have checked. I do happen to know that this power supply is good at detecting current overloads, so it shuts off and doesn't blow things up. Now, when it comes to looking for what's shorted, it's almost certainly going to be on the 12-volt rail, and that means that it's almost certainly going to be probably one of these right here. When you look at the connectors here, the red wires are going to be 5 volts. Probably it's either this white wire or this yellow wire, or potentially, well, it could be this blue one or the brown one. It's not going to be the black wires. Those are all ground. It's not going to be the red wires. Those are 5 volts. One of these is going to be minus 5 volts. One is going to be minus 12 volts, maybe like the brown wire. One is a power good signal. I don't know which one that is. And then one's going to be the 12 volts. And I found that the tantalums always seem to go bad on the 12 volt rail or the minus 12 volt rail. So we just take our probes here, make sure that it's set to continuity mode. And let's take a look at the white wire here. No, that one's fine. How about the yellow wire? There we go. We have an absolute dead short to ground on that yellow wire there. Check the brown wire. Now, it's beeping. You couldn't really see it there. It's beeping, but it's not a dead short. 2.97 ohms. That's going to be fine. But this one is at 000. That is absolutely shorted. We can still check the 5 volt rail here. That's fine. And then we check the blue wire here. That's not shorted. So it's really the yellow wire, which almost certainly is going to be 12 volt rail. Another way you can actually check easily is just plug this connector back in to the motherboard there, and then grab one of the power connectors here that goes to the drives, and we'll go from the yellow wire on here to the black wire, and there we go, we're shorted as well, 0.42. So that's, you know, it's making its way through a bunch of wires, which is why it's not 0.0. Unfortunately, the resolution on this particular multimeter is not that great, which is why it's showing all zeros. But now we have to figure out where the tantalum is that is actually shorted. And it could be any of these little yellow guys here, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's maybe like this guy right here. No, that one's not it. Just kind of poke around. So it's probably one of these in between the slots here. So that one is shorted, but I bet you there's shorts on all of these here, all the way on this rail. Now, with this multimeter, because it's not that good, I can't really tell by looking at the resistance which has the lowest resistance. That would typically be the way I would do it, is you would go between the pins on here, and if it's like 0.01, and then another one is 0.03, another one's 0.03, then it's the 0.01, it's the lowest one that is the problem. But unfortunately here, this multimeter is not that good, so I can't tell. So I'm going to try a different method that involves using this, which is the thermal camera that was recently sent in by Top Don here, the TC004. We'll just fire this thing up. And once this boots up, what we'll be able to do is I'm just going to feed some current into the 12 volt rail on the motherboard here, and that will make the component that's shorted get hot. So I have these plugged into my bench power supply. We'll just clip on to the pins that are shorted, and I already forgot which one it is. It's ground and that one. And I'm going to set my bench power supply to, I don't know, I guess I'll put it at 12 volts. And I'm going to start at 150 milliamps. And we'll put the motherboard down here on the bench to give us as much room to look at it with the thermal camera here. So I haven't even turned on the power supply yet. But what I'm going to do is, as soon as I turn it on, and I know the camera's not really in focus, and unfortunately this has a feature where I could like plug a USB cable in and stream directly to OBS. It doesn't work. I don't know what's going on with that, so I have to rely on the screen here. So sorry about that. So I have the bench supply set to 12 volts, but 150 milliamps, and as soon as I turn that on, it's going to short the power supply, which isn't bad for the power supply. It's just going to dump 150 milliamps at whatever voltage into the motherboard, and then hopefully I should start to see the component that gets warm. And I'm gonna start recording on this so I can overlay this in the video. There we go, it's recording. And I'm gonna turn this on. Of course we have a short. What's getting hot on here? It's not really making anything hot, which is interesting. And I suppose it's definitely a dead short. It might just be because I'm not pumping enough current into this thing. So I'm going to turn it up to 500 milliamps or so. And now what are we getting? I am not really seeing anything. Oh, I had my hand over these slots here. That made that glow. Okay, there it is. It's that one. You see that? Can I zoom in? No. Let me point at it with something metal here so I don't touch it. Yep. That part right there is getting warm. So that's our guy. Cool, it works. We're putting 551 milliamps at 0.8 volts. So I don't know how many watts that is, but whatever, it's getting that little guy warm. And we'll grab a marker. It's not that one, it's this one right here. This is the guy. Now, unfortunately, this problem with the tantalums is a super common one. I'm just gonna grab it with the hemostats here so it'll be easier to pull out. It's my opinion that these are 16 volt parts. And what happens is they are just not, there's not enough headroom there. So they go short over time, you know, just because that's something that tantalums do, but especially when you're running them at voltage that's a little bit too high. Electrical engineers can probably chime in on this here, but it's my opinion that we should probably replace these if we're going to with 25 volt tantalums, just to sort of avoid the potential issue with them going short like this. Now I'm just taking a look at this with a loop. This is a 15 microfarad at 16 volts. So just like I suspected, it's 16 volts. You can put an electrolytic in that spot or just leave it off or whatever. It's not a huge deal. The 12 volt rail is not used by the motherboard. It's literally just used by stuff plugged into the ISA bus. And I'm assuming our short is gone. Yep, it is gone entirely. So I'm just gonna stick a random electrolytic cap into the motherboard. This one is 50 volts, 47 microfarad, totally fine. And this motherboard has a label for which is the positive, but you could just use your multimeter to figure that out. Positive goes to, well, the yellow wire, and the negative goes to the ground. Easy peasy. While I wait here for the desoldering iron to warm up, I am just wiping off some of this weird stuff here. I have vinegar on this little cotton bud here. So I'm going around here and getting rid of the little green stuff that I was seeing. Oddly enough, it's cleaning up the keyboard jack. And on the back of the board, we definitely have some green stuff here too. I'm not getting any reaction to the vinegar though. It's not like it's bubbling up or whatever. So I think this is extremely minimal. We really lucked out that that battery was external and not on board. It is interesting though. There was actually a little bit of green crusty over here though. So it did make its way along the board. And that was all just from, I think, capillary action, probably along the wire of whatever external battery there was. I did a little brushing action. I don't see any more green stuff. Oh, there's a bit here on these resistors. Okay, I just bathed it in some IPA to get that vinegar off of there. Don't want to leave that on the board. And now I'm just going to try to clean out the holes on the board here. Now, one of the things you might run into, especially with the boards like this, seem relatively well designed. Okay, that was fine. The ground plane, especially on the ground pin, might make it really hard to solder and desolder. You got to use something with high thermal mass or use hot air to heat up the board first. Let's see if I could get away with doing it with this. I can, okay. So I have that little cap installed in the board there. We'll just get this reattached here. And I'm just gonna hit the board with some compressed air just to get this IPA to fully evaporate. All right, just like that. Looks like we still have a little bit of the green crusties on there. It's very minimal. A little bit over here as well, or I don't know, maybe this is something else. I have to say that I do kind of like how the board looks. Just visually appealing with the way the PCB looks. I guess the PCB was probably made in the US. I don't know for sure. Put the postcard in here. See if we get some postcodes. All right, here we go. We're gonna have a posting system or another shorted part. Oh, come on, what? We have another short that just developed. Which wire is that? The brown wire shorted now. Yep. It's not unusual for this exact thing to happen. Honestly, this is not unusual. I'm just gonna go through the same steps that I did a moment ago to find the cap on the, it's probably the minus 12 volt rail, and I'll swap that one out as well. All right, we're ready for try number 3. And by the way, I wanted to add that for sure, that rail that was on the brown wire here was not shorted. And when I powered it up after replacing the first cap, it then became shorted. And like I said, that's not really that unusual. Now I looked at these other 5 volt caps, these tantalums are on the 5 volt rail, and they're all 16 volt capped. So there's way more headroom between the 5 volt rail and the 16 volts. And some power supplies might put like 13 volts on the 12 volt rail, and that's pretty close to that 16 volts. And maybe that's why they short, I don't know. Anyways, let's see what happens now. Okay, we're posting. Sweet. That means this motherboard definitely, there we go, it's beeping as well. should show a sign of life when we put a video card in. So we'll put in my fast video card here. It's one I've tested and it's a pretty speedy card. We'll put in my little ROM card here, which will give this thing XT-IDE capabilities. And then we're gonna put in my 16-bit card here, which has a compact flash in it as well. Now, one thing that's funny, and this is kind of interesting, is that my compact flash card that I'm using here, this is like a 128 meg one. Because the usual card I use, which is a 4 gig card, I think, I can't find it. It's somewhere on my bench here. It stopped working. It works fine when I plug it into my card reader, so it's not like I lost any data or files that are on there, but it will not work in any motherboard anymore. And not just this card here, the 16-bit card, but using an XT IDE also doesn't work. So I don't know what's going on with that. It's really kind of strange. Maybe it stopped working on 5 volts and 3.3 is all it works on. Not totally sure. We're going to be using the Extron here, 300A. There it is, it's working for VGA capture. I have the keyboard connected up. I might need to deoxit that connector due to that little bit of corrosion that was on there, but who knows, maybe this will work. Here we go, let's see what happens. It's a very slow post, if it's even posting at all. I had a green flash there. Maybe I should put the post analyzer card back in, because it doesn't seem to be doing anything right now. All right, let's see what's happening. We're getting post codes, so it's doing something. But that flash is not exactly what I would expect it to be doing right now. And the post code we're getting is just 00. Well, best thing to do is just take out the extra cards we don't need. So we'll just have the video card along with the post analyzer here. Could be the color mono jumper needs to be set. Same thing. We just ended up with the post code of 00. I'm going to plug in a different card. I have another DSLogic card. This one is slow AF. That's what I wrote on it. Could be bad contacts in the slot. Could be that this motherboard has a problem though as well. We're not getting a beep anymore. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Weird. Didn't like this card. Now it's counting really slowly, really slow. Zeos International, St. Paul, Minnesota. So that's cool. It's customized. DVLX 6099, reading the code at the bottom down there. Let's get a jumper on the turbo switch because this is a slow count, really slow. Let's hit delete though. Try to get into the BIOS here. Turbo switch, it's right here. Okay. Floppy drive controller failure. Yeah, of course it is. All right, CMOS setup. Oh, very, very basic. We'll just set some stuff in here. Obviously, there's no battery hooked up. We don't need to set up floppy drive or hard drive. We will set this to VGA, EGA, guest keyboard installed, video BIOS shadow, and main BIOS shadow. Now, it's disabled based on the jumper setting that I think is on here. So we'll see how it goes. We'll save the data. Now, there's no other settings in here. That's it. And let's see if it counts up the RAM faster. Okay, much better now that we have the jumper on there. Now, what we also saw in here, though, I'll go back to delete, is we had some diagnostics. Now, often the diags are, oh, these are not bad, actually. Yeah, these aren't too bad. So you can check your keyboard. So we can see if our keyboard is working, which it is. How do we exit out of here? Control break. We can run video tests here. So I don't know, we'll try color test because everything is monochrome. Oh yeah, okay, we're getting color. Interesting, I don't know what sync test is. Nothing. Adapter test, ooh, colorful. Attribute test, that's for the text color and stuff. Display mode, we know that's working because we're looking at it. Let's do some graphics here. Nice, CGA colors. Simple, but hey, it's testing something. It's nice that it's even in there. Printer adapter and COM port adapter test. And if we had a hard drive and a floppy drive, we'd obviously be able to test those, and we don't have those configured, so that's it. So real memory 640K, extended memory 1408, coprocessor is absent. Yeah, everything seems to be working here. So let's exit and try to boot into MS-DOS. Please stand by. Looks good. BIOS date, 1989. Oh, of course we can't boot anything. I don't have these other cards in here. Okay, with the disk controller and the XT IDE BIOS back in, there we go, that's working because that would be the XT IDE BIOS. I have the RAM test in there as well. So it should boot. Yeah, it's booting. See how fast this thing is. First test I was run, speed 600. All right, clock speed 15.93 and the CPU speed 22.71. I couldn't tell you if that's good or bad when it comes to 36SXs at 16 megahertz, but it's working. That's good. I do want to try and go back to my other video card though, because this one is really slow. Did you see how bad the performance was there? Let's try the same slot that I was just plugged into with the card that was working. See if that makes this thing work. This card works as far as I'm aware. I was recently using it. Oh, yeah. Wait. No, look at that. We saw text for a second, didn't we? And then it kind of went blank. Somehow this card is incompatible with this motherboard? I've never run into this before. This card is very reliable normally. Now this card here, the DSLogic card, nothing's really special about it other than I have it set for 0 wait states. I think this is a prototype card. Eval board, yeah. So this is like made by DSLogic themselves. Let's take the 0 wait state jumper off. Maybe it's just not compatible for some reason with this motherboard. And that will unfortunately mean we're going to lose a lot of performance because this card is really fast when it's running in 0 wait states. Let's turn it on. Yeah, it's working. We're getting the clicks. So this motherboard is incompatible with 0 wait state VGA cards. I have never run into that before, and that sucks because that means we're going to lose a lot of performance on this card. And I guess this was tested with whatever card this came with, said like a Paradise card or whatever. Oh, we lost the CMOS settings. No big deal. They tested this in the magazine with whatever video card was supplied with this, which is that Paradise card. And it's kind of a bummer that this doesn't work with the 0 wait states. I have Jim Leonard's top bench on here. Let's run this. Let's see what we're getting performance-wise. Now, with top bench, this does take into account how fast your video card is. So if you have a slow video card, it will affect what we're looking at here. Now, it's saying that this is comparable to some IBM PS2 Model 35, which is a 20 megahertz 36SX, and the opcode metric, which is the CPU speed, very, very similar. And the memory speed on this computer is a little bit faster at 197 than the 209 on the IBM, and the mem test as well is very, very similar. It's actually a little bit slower here because the lower the number, the better. And the vidmem is faster on this than it is on the IBM system and 3DM. So it's very similarly matched. And this is running at 16 megahertz. And I guess that kind of implies that the performance of this machine, like they said, was pretty good. And I don't think in Top Bench here, the caching for the system ROM or the VGA has anything to do with anything. That this doesn't use the BIOS call, so it doesn't really matter. It's more to do whether if this is running at 0 wait states or 1 wait states and the other RAM timing stuff, which unfortunately we don't really have access to because it might be a jumper that's unlabeled on here. I don't really know, but it's just more to do with the chipset and stuff like that. And I guess IBM is using their own chipset. And then of course on this motherboard, we're using this VLSI chipset. Similar systems, 36SX33 clone was somehow in a similar performance bracket to this machine, which again is kind of surprising. 33 megahertz, way faster than the 16 that this is actually running at. So that is pretty cool. If we run speed 600 again, let's take the turbo jumper off. And it halves the speed exactly. And we hit F9, then we should see that reflected in the clock speed probably. Yep, 7.9 megahertz. And we put this jumper back on. And there we go. We are running at double speed now. And you can see right there that the video performance is 4183, and that's with 1 wait state on the video card here. And that other card, I think it was like 2000 or something like that. It was a lot slower. This is another DSLogic card here, the one that was going really slow. And that's why I put slow AF on here. I don't know why it's so slow, but it really is. And this card is so much faster. And in 0 wait state, it just flies. It'd probably get more like 7,000 characters per millisecond with the 0 wait states. All right, so let's run a game here. I'll just do no sound since we don't need to hear the PC beep speaker stuff. There it is, Attack of the Petsky Robots, David Murray's game, running on this machine in VGA mode. And yeah, works fine. And no issues whatsoever, which of course is completely expected. I was going to try to run Fast Doom, but it's not on this 128 meg card. It's on my other one that's not working right now. And I was going to try to run Windows, and it doesn't seem like it's installed on here. I have the Windows Workgroup setup files, and that is it. What we can run is Fractant, because I have this installed, the latest version. We'll just run this in that mode there. And let's calculate some fractals. Yes, look at that. I don't remember how to use this program. Oh, it made a little beepy sound. You can do like color palette swapping and stuff like that. I think it will tell us in the help menu here. Color cycling mode is C or plus or minus. And you can edit the palette as well. Okay, let's do C here. Right, there it is. It's cycling colors. We can go backwards and forwards. Nice. I think we can adjust settings here and stuff. And yeah, there's all sorts of things you can do here. I don't really remember how to use this program. I remember back in the day using this program, and I absolutely loved just zooming in on the fractals. And of course, when you have a much faster computer, it draws them really quickly. And then doing the whole color cycling thing and just thinking, oh, this is so amazing. It was just a great highlight of like what you could do with computers and math. It was very cool. All right, so there we have it. The Zeos 386SX 16 megahertz motherboard made in the USA by a company out of Minnesota. And it's pretty awesome that this thing still works. Minimal battery damage because of course the battery was off the motherboard, which basically saved this thing. And it seems like a relatively speedy motherboard for what it is. Overclocking might be possible on here with changing out this crystal. Of course, the chipset we know is now rated for 16 megahertz. So that would be pushing pretty much everything beyond what it was rated for. I wouldn't be surprised if you could get 18, 19 megahertz out of this probably without, you know, swapping the CPU out, which of course is difficult because it's a surface mount component there. And obviously if I could find the RAM chips, I could expand this thing to 4 megabytes. But as it sits, it's cool to see this motherboard works. I just have to swap out those two shorted tantalums here, which are now electrolytics. And there we go. I have a working 386SX motherboard. I don't have a ton of these because they seem to die a lot due to the battery leakage. And I think over my pile of dead and broken stuff is sitting over there. I think I have a few PC motherboards that definitely need some battery repair work done on them. And one of them might be an SX motherboard, although I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyhow, it's really neat to see that this thing does work, and with some minor repairs, it's all it took to get it working. And it's definitely going to go into stock in case I ever want to build a, I don't know, period correct SX16 from the early 1990s. And it's cool to have read about this thing in the magazine there in PC Magazine to see that this was quite a performant motherboard, and it got the editor's choice in the computer that it was in, of course, which this is the main component. But so hopefully you enjoyed this little casual look at this motherboard. I think I did. I'm really happy to see that this thing is a survivor. I'll be taking the photos, dumping the BIOS, uploading that to the retro web. So if you have one of these motherboards that's missing all of its jumpers, you can at least look at the photos of the one that I have here to get your board up and running. If you like this video, thumbs up. If you didn't, you know what to do. Huge thanks to my supporters. Their names are going up beside the screen to make it possible I do this full time. You can now become a supporter on YouTube memberships or Patreon. Both of those things will work. It's basically the same stuff on both: early access to videos and other behind the scenes content. And yeah, you know, all the usual YouTube junk. I guess that's going to be that. So stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.